The U.S. military has started sending an anti-missile system to South Korea 1 day after North Korea launched 4 missiles into the Sea of Japan. Joining us live from Beijing, China, NBC News correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer. Janice, the THAAD system, or Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, isn't without controversy. Tell us the latest.
Well, it is ramping up tension across Asia today. Parts of that controversial U.S.-made defense system arriving in South Korea overnight. It was no secret the U.S. had committed to it long ago, but it is coming just after this latest missile test from North Korea, where 4 missiles were fired toward Japan in what the regime state news agency said was practice to strike at U.S. military bases there. So this is increasingly a big security challenge for President Trump. The problem is that China is strongly opposed to this missile defense system. They think it does nothing more than upset the strategic balance in the region. And officials vowed today that they will take, quote, powerful measures, not only against South Korea, but the United States as well. We're seeing it in small ways, consumer-like sanctions, where Chinese travel companies are telling people to not go on tours there. There have been protests against the Lotte Group, which is the retail giant that gave up its golf course to the South Korean government to use as the THAAD launch site. The U.S. at this point seems willing to accept some strain on the U.S.-China relationship, some friction in that relationship in reviewing North Korea, its policy on North Korea, and obviously what they see as a rising threat level. Mika?
NBC's Janice Mackey-Frayer, thank you so much. We want to bring in member of the Foreign Relations Committee, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. And Senator, we have David Ignatius and Katty Kay standing by. But first, Mike Barnicle has a question for you. Mike?
Senator, last week I was in Berlin, and I was with a group of people, fairly top of the house, from India, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Kuwait, and they were all universally concerned about the erratic nature of this presidency in dealing with specifically allies around the world, wondering where it was all going and seemingly indicating that this was weakening our position in the world, America as a nation to look toward. Do you pick up on that? Do you hear anything about that from our allies?
Yeah, as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, I have foreign leaders coming into the office every week. I've traveled since the inauguration to speak to leaders in Europe. And, you know, the world is freaked out right now because they see American leadership vanishing before their eyes. And it's frankly not just the erratic nature of the Trump administration. You know, one day you have Nikki Haley coming out and talking about Russia being in Ukraine. 2 days later, the President of the United States casts doubt on whether the Russians have ever invaded Ukraine. One day we're against the one China policy, the next day we're for it. It's also the fact that the State Department, you know, seems to be in the process of being eviscerated. The daily briefings are gone. We're not communicating our values to the world. There's been no nominee for Deputy Secretary of State or any of the assistant secretaries. You know, America just seems to be fundamentally withdrawing. And you know, this is at a moment where we live in a multipolar world where, you know, frankly, it's pretty easy to accept an offer from China or from Russia to be your pal if the United States isn't on the playing field. So it's a really critical moment right now, and it's hard for many of us to understand why the president doesn't see the reality of what's happening.
So to quote the gentleman from Connecticut, important to do this. The world is freaked out. I just want to say I'm not the only one who's slightly concerned at this point. Senator David Ignatius has a question for you. David?
Senator, I want to ask you about the North Korea threat with this latest round of missile launches yesterday. The North Koreans keep pushing toward the capability to attack U.S. bases, U.S. territory with eventually nuclear missiles. And I want to ask you, the New York Times over the weekend published a story saying that the United States has been using our most advanced cyber weapons, efforts to interfere in the North Korean supply chain to try to stop that program. And my question is that a tactic that you think is appropriate, one that the Congress would support in trying to deal with this very serious threat?
So I wouldn't list it as number one on my preferred tactics to deal with this problem, in part because, of course, it renders the United States open to the same kind of attack, and we know already that the North Koreans have a fairly sophisticated cyber warfare operation, but our tools are fairly limited, as you know, right now, David. And one of the things that really worries me about the lack of diplomatic capability in this administration is the inability to work with China to try to get North Korea to change their mind. Now, President Obama had a fairly functional relationship with the Chinese premier. I think he would have known how to work through this problem over the THAAD missile system deployment. Again, the fact that we really don't have a State Department today, that we don't have a president that's interested in creating a functional working relationship with China, makes it much more difficult to solve the North Korea problem and leaves us with very few tools other than these cyber warfare tools. So, yeah, no, it's not the preferred method, but this president is taking other tools off the table.
Katty Kay.
Freaked out is a pretty good way of describing it, Senator. That's pretty much what I'm hearing too. At some point in this presidency, and the rumblings from Pyongyang suggest that it might be sooner rather than later, this president will face an international crisis. Where do you think that crisis will come from, and do you think this White House, as it is structured at the moment, is capable of dealing with that?
I do not think that this White House is capable of dealing with a crisis. I will tell you, I am more confident now that Michael Flynn is out of the NSC and McMaster is in. I think he brings a sober-mindedness that is necessary. But, once again, I'll come back to the concern I registered earlier. When you're not staffing the agencies that would help you deal with a crisis, when you're really showing no interest in putting diplomats out on the playing field, wherever it comes, it's going to be difficult to manage. I was initially very concerned that we were moving quickly towards a confrontation with Iran. I think with Flynn out of the picture, that maybe is less of a likelihood. But it's going to come, and it's pretty clear that this administration right now is not ready for it.
Eddie.
Senator Murphy, I want to return to the new executive order for a quick second. How do you convince all of those Americans who supported Donald Trump and who support the ban that what this new executive order doesn't represent our values? What do you say to them at this moment?
Well, I mean, listen, I want to make that case on moral grounds that this violates the concept of what this country has been from the beginning, right? We're a country that was founded on the idea that people can come here fleeing religious persecution and be free to practice the religion of their choice. But I guess with those voters, I would lead with national security. I'd show them the traffic on extremist websites that calls this the blessed ban. And that's an important term because the invasion of Iraq was called the blessed invasion because it created a means of recruitment for global jihadists. They could flow into Iraq, learn how to fight against the United States and kill a lot of Americans. Those same recruiters, or at least recruiters of the same ilk, are calling this the blessed ban because it's revitalizing the terrorist movement just as ISIS is being militarily defeated inside Iraq and Syria. So I'd show them what's happening right now and how this is in real time putting America at greater risk of a terrorist attack.
Senator, what could the president do at this point or say at this point to assure you that he is fit to lead, that could restore his credibility, if you would agree that he's failing on that front on a very basic level, not to put words in your mouth, but do you think he is failing on a very basic level?
Listen, I think he fails to understand how to put together a clear and consistent foreign policy. I mean, I would like for there to be a week in which America takes the same position on Monday with respect to its foreign policy as it has on Friday. I would like for the president to make a commitment to stop tweeting about foreign policy for a period of time. If he wants to tweet about the health care law, go ahead, but stop tweeting about America's relationship with our allies because it's making it more difficult for them to understand what America's for. And then I'd ask him to staff up his agencies. Let Rex Tillerson be the Secretary of State. Have them do public briefings again so America can know what we stand for. I think it's unlikely that he's going to take those steps. But, again, the world isn't waiting for the United States to have a coherent foreign policy. Other countries are making their deals with the Russians, are making their deals with the Chinese right now because they just don't see that we're going to be on the playing field for very much longer.
Mike Barnicle, I mean, not that he's listening to me, but he needs to have the guts to get rid of any of the negative forces in his inner circle, and we know who they are. He needs to work on a speech with his foreign policy team and execute it and stick to it. That would be the only way there could be any semblance of a reset at this point.
Well, there's one specific area that he might need to address by not addressing. I don't know. I'm looking for a little insight on this from David Ignatius. David, Rex Tillerson is a hugely respected figure around the globe. He would arrive in Riyadh or Moscow or any other capitals around the world and be regarded almost as a head of state given his importance. And yet now he is being treated by the White House as if he were a GS-12. What's his future?
Well, his future is his to chart. I think Tillerson has been slow off the mark. I'm told that he didn't want to be visible until he really had command of his brief. He's got a little bit of a skeleton in the State Department. He hasn't got enough people in the top jobs, and again, he didn't want to go off until he was fully supported. He is somebody who can be persuasive. When he speaks, the kind of depth, authority of American power comes through. He's been a global CEO. He knows people around the world. The same thing with Jim Mattis. I mean, we shouldn't talk as if this administration is simply Donald Trump. To the extent the world is reassured, it's because they see people in senior positions who they know have good judgment and they trust. And somehow this process has got to work back toward the White House so that someone like a Tillerson, someone like a General Mattis, General Kelly at Homeland Security is seen to have more of a voice, more of a role in how this works, and tweets, these crazy tweets, have less of a role. And the question is whether the president's going to get that message. If not, this is going to be one self-inflicted wound after another.
Member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Chris Murphy, thank you very much for being on the show. And
thanks, guys.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.